John Wayne once said, "I believe in white supremacy until blacks are educated to a point of responsibility." Why did you retweet that?
I did not retweet that.
Okay, it says it in my notes, so.
No, well, that's wrong, because I don't.
But what about the civil rights? I mean, it's necessary.
What about the civil rights?
Your love is real. Near you, I want to be. The birds are singing, it is song time.
Hollywood's golden age racist stars were way worse than you think. From the Oscar winner who danced when Martin Luther King was murdered.
I'll never forget, later on that week, I got a long-distance telephone call from Snag Wirris, all the way from California.
To the crooner who wore blackface while American soldiers died overseas.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will conclude this part of the entertainment with a brand new song sung here in Chicago for the first time on any stage.
To the dancer who mocked the very artist he claimed to honor.
Oh, Abraham.
These stars actively worked to keep an entire system of oppression alive. The worst part? Most of them never faced consequences. They died beloved, honored, and wealthy while their victims remained nameless. John Wayne sat down for a Playboy interview in 1971, and what came out of his mouth wasn't a slip of the tongue or a misunderstood comment. He looked directly at the interviewer and declared his belief in white supremacy. Not as a joke, not as provocation, as a statement of fact about how he believed the world should work.
Maybe I read the wrong dictionary, but I thought that a liberal was a man who would listen to everybody.
He explained that black people simply weren't ready for equality yet. They needed to be educated first, brought up to a certain level of responsibility before they could be treated as equals. As if equality was something that needed to be earned rather than recognized as a basic human right.
I guess that they've had a pretty tough break, but not quite as bad as you and your do-gooder friends would have them believe. They live as well here as they live in any other country over that 199 years.
But Wayne didn't stop there. He moved on to Native Americans, the people whose land had been stolen to build the nation that made him a millionaire. He called their genocide a matter of survival. Nothing more complicated than that. White people needed the land, so they took it, and anyone who got in the way deserved what happened to them. The interview became public record. No one could claim they didn't know. Studios kept casting him, directors kept working with him, awards kept coming. The Orange County Airport was named after him in 1979, just 8 months before he died. It took until 2020 for there to be serious calls to remove his name from that airport. Wayne spent decades playing American heroes on screen. The strong, silent cowboy, the tough Marine sergeant, the man who stood for justice and protected the innocent. Millions of people grew up idolizing him, wanting to be like him, teaching their children that he represented the best of American masculinity. He died in 1979 at age 72. His funeral was attended by some of the most powerful people in Hollywood and politics. President Jimmy Carter issued a statement praising his contributions to American culture. Nobody mentioned the white supremacy. Nobody talked about his celebration of genocide. The myth was too valuable to let the truth destroy it. Walter Brennan won 3 Academy Awards during his career. 3, more than any other male actor at the time. He played lovable sidekicks and cantankerous old men with hearts of gold. America adored him. And on April 4th, 1968, when Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis, Walter Brennan threw a party.
I'll never forget, later on that week, I got a long-distance telephone call from Snag Wirris, all the way from California.
Not metaphorically, not in his heart, he actually celebrated. Reports from people who knew him described his reaction as dancing when he heard the news. Dr. King, a man who preached nonviolence and spent his life fighting for basic human rights, had been shot dead on a hotel balcony, and one of Hollywood's most decorated actors was thrilled about it.
Dr. King was standing on the balcony of a second-floor hotel room tonight when, according to a companion, a shot was fired from across the street. In the friend's words, the bullet exploded in his face.
Brennan had been involved in far-right politics for years. He funded organizations that promoted segregation. He spoke at rallies that called for resistance to civil rights legislation. But celebrating a murder was different. That wasn't political ideology anymore. That was pure hatred manifesting as joy over bloodshed.
I am a grandfather, though. I was born in Massachusetts. And I do want my grandchildren to grow up in peace, security, and prosperity.
His career didn't suffer at all. He kept getting work. His awards stayed on his mantle. Hollywood never publicly addressed his reaction to King's death. The studios that employed him never released statements. The actors who worked alongside him never spoke out. Everyone just kept going like nothing had happened. Brennan made multiple films after 1968. He appeared on television shows. He did voice work for Disney, the same company that built its brand on family values and wholesome entertainment. Paid Walter Brennan to work for them after he celebrated the assassination of the most prominent civil rights leader in American history. He died in 1974 at age 80. His obituaries focused on his remarkable career and his 3 Oscars. They talked about his memorable performances and his contributions to cinema. The celebration of King's murder wasn't mentioned. That part of his story was quietly buried with him, left out of the official record that would define his legacy. Al Jolson became a superstar by painting his face black and mimicking what white people imagined black culture looked like. The jazz singer in 1927 wasn't just entertainment. It was a deliberate choice to introduce talking pictures to the world through racial mockery.
Your love is real, near you I want to be. The birds are singing, it is song.
He didn't invent blackface, but he perfected it for the modern era. Silent films had used the practice, but Jolson brought it into the sound age with full force. His exaggerated movements, his dialect, his entire performance was designed to turn black humanity into caricature, and audiences ate it up. The jazz singer made history as the first feature-length film with synchronized dialogue. That technological achievement should have been a moment of pure progress for cinema. Instead, it was forever tied to a man in blackface singing about his mammy. The birth of modern movies and the perpetuation of racist stereotypes happened simultaneously. Jolson defended the practice his entire life. He claimed he was honoring black performers, that he was bringing their art to wider audiences who wouldn't otherwise hear it, as if stealing someone's culture and profiting from it while they remained poor and excluded was somehow a favor.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will conclude this part of the entertainment with a brand new song sung here in Chicago for the first time on...
The real black performers of the era were shut out of mainstream entertainment almost entirely. They couldn't get roles in major films. They couldn't perform in most theaters. They couldn't record with major labels. But Al Jolson could paint his face and make millions pretending to be them. He remained beloved until his death in 1950. His funeral drew thousands of mourners. The entertainment industry praised him as a pioneer and an innovator. His contribution to film history was celebrated, while the performers he mocked and displaced remained footnotes. The Jim Crow Museum eventually used his image as an example of racist memorabilia, but by then he'd already spent decades being honored as an American icon. David O. Selznick poured his heart and millions of dollars into creating Gone with the Wind. The result was a nearly 4-hour love letter to the Confederacy that won 8 Academy Awards and became one of the highest-grossing films in history.
All we've got is cotton and slaves and...
The movie presented slavery as a benevolent institution where happy enslaved people served kind masters on beautiful plantations. The Civil War became a tragic disruption of an idyllic way of life rather than a fight over human bondage. The South's defeat was portrayed as the death of grace and nobility rather than the end of an economy built on torture. Selznick wasn't stupid. He knew exactly what story he was telling. He made deliberate choices about how to portray enslaved characters. He decided which scenes to include and which to cut. He shaped the narrative to make audiences sympathize with slave owners and view abolition as destructive rather than liberating.
Why do I have to take a nap? I'm not tired.
Well brought up young ladies take snaps at parties, and it's high time you start.
The film's most famous black character barely qualified as a character at all. Mammy existed only to serve Scarlett O'Hara, to prop up white fragility, to be wise and loyal without ever having her own desires or dignity. Hattie McDaniel won an Oscar for playing her, becoming the first black actor to win an Academy Award. She had to sit at a segregated table during the ceremony.
Fellow members of the motion picture industry and honored guests, this is one of the happiest moments of my life.
Gone with the Wind played in theaters for years. It got re-released multiple times. Generations of Americans grew up watching it, absorbing its version of history, learning to romanticize the antebellum South. The film taught millions of people that slavery wasn't that bad, that enslaved people were content, that the real tragedy was what happened to white Southerners after the war. Selznick died in 1965, still convinced he'd made a masterpiece. He never apologized for the film's content. He never acknowledged the damage it did. Hollywood kept celebrating it as a cinematic achievement while ignoring what it actually achieved, making slavery look gentle and making genocide look justified. Cecil B. DeMille built his reputation on spectacle, epic films with thousands of extras and massive sets. But woven into all that grandeur was a consistent pattern of reducing non-white people to cartoons and villains. His Native American characters were either noble savages who helped white heroes or bloodthirsty monsters who deserved to be killed. There was no middle ground, no complexity, no humanity, just props in white people's stories about conquering the frontier. His Asian characters were even worse. Sinister masterminds plotting against innocent Americans, exotic temptresses who existed only to seduce white men, subservient servants who bowed and scraped and spoke in broken English. Every racist stereotype Hollywood could dream up found its way into DeMille's films. The man directed over 70 films, 70 opportunities to tell different stories, to portray people with dignity, to push back against the prevailing racist attitudes of the time. Instead, he used every single one to reinforce those attitudes. He made racism entertaining. He gave it spectacular production values and sweeping musical scores. DeMille's films weren't just passively racist. They were actively working to convince audiences that these stereotypes were real, that Native Americans really were savage obstacles to progress, that Asians really were sneaky and untrustworthy, that white Christian Americans were the only people capable of civilization and morality. His influence on early Hollywood was enormous. Other directors copied his techniques. Studios tried to replicate his success. The racist portrayals he normalized became industry standard. Entire generations of filmmakers learned from his example that non-white people were acceptable targets for mockery and dehumanization. DeMille died in 1959, remembered as a master of cinema. His films are still studied in film schools. His techniques are still praised. The racism is mentioned as a footnote, a regrettable product of his time, as if he had no choice but to make 70 films full of hateful stereotypes. Errol Flynn played swashbuckling heroes and romantic leads. He was handsome and charming, and audiences loved watching him fence his way through adventure after adventure.
You want the girl? Why not? And I'm willing to pay for what I want.
But his personal life was full of behavior that would have destroyed a less marketable star. His autobiography hinted at beliefs and actions that studios worked hard to keep quiet. Associates described him as holding views that couldn't be made public without destroying his image. But unlike Wayne or Brennan, Flynn kept his worst thoughts mostly private, shared only with people who wouldn't betray him. That privacy protected his career. Without public statements to point to, without documented incidents that could be proven, the studios could maintain the illusion. Flynn the character remained separate from Flynn the man. Audiences could keep believing in the hero without confronting what the actor actually believed. Hollywood perfected this separation. As long as a star didn't say the quiet parts out loud, their private bigotry could remain private. The system protected its investments by allowing certain behaviors to stay hidden while punishing only those stupid or bold enough to go public. Flynn's tumultuous personal life became the story everyone focused on. His drinking, his affairs, his legal troubles. Those scandals were manageable. They fit the roguish persona. But the deeper ugliness stayed buried under carefully maintained public relations. He died in 1959 at just 50 years old, his body destroyed by years of excess. The obituaries focused on his film roles and his wild lifestyle. Whatever ugliness existed in his beliefs went largely unexamined. The gaps in the public record were treated as mysteries rather than deliberate omissions. Bing Crosby sold himself as America's friendly neighbor, the crooner with the smooth voice and the easy smile.
We are honored in Newport to have visiting us several famous orchestras for the Jazz Festival tomorrow night.
The man who sang White Christmas and made people feel warm and safe. But that same man put on blackface for Holiday Inn and saw nothing wrong with it.
Abraham.
The film came out in 1942 during World War II, when America was supposedly fighting for freedom and democracy. But Crosby performed a number in blackface while the country sent black soldiers to fight and die overseas in segregated units. The hypocrisy was staggering, but nobody seemed to notice or care. Holiday Inn wasn't some obscure film. It was a major studio production with a big budget and wide release. Millions of people saw it. Millions of people watched Bing Crosby in blackface and either laughed or felt nothing. The culture had normalized racial mockery so completely that it played in mainstream theaters without protest. Crosby never apologized. He never even addressed it. When the film was discussed in later years, he talked about the music and the production values. The blackface sequence was treated like it didn't exist or didn't matter. Just another performance in a long career full of performances. His popularity never wavered. He kept making films and records. He hosted radio shows and television specials. He became an even bigger star as the decades went on. The blackface was quietly edited out of some later broadcasts of Holiday Inn, but Crosby himself faced zero consequences. He died in 1977, still beloved. Obituaries called him a national treasure. Radio stations played his music in tribute. Nobody wanted to complicate the grief by mentioning the racism. The sanitized version of his legacy was more comfortable than the truth. Gary Cooper built his career playing strong, silent types, men of few words who let their actions speak. But that silence extended beyond his film roles into his personal life, where he watched his colleagues spread hatred and said nothing. He worked alongside John Wayne on multiple films. He saw Wayne's beliefs up close. He heard the comments and the jokes and the casual dehumanization. And Cooper, the man famous for playing moral heroes, stayed quiet. He chose comfort over confrontation, career over conscience. Cooper wasn't documented making overtly racist statements himself, but in Hollywood's system, silence was a choice. Speaking up risked reputation and work. Staying quiet kept you employed and respected. Cooper chose the latter every single time. His friendship with Wayne complicated his legacy. The two men were close for years. They socialized together. Their families knew each other. You don't maintain that kind of relationship with someone whose beliefs you find abhorrent. You either share those beliefs or you decide they're not important enough to end the friendship. Hollywood rewarded Cooper's silence with continued stardom. He won 2 Academy Awards. He got top billing in major productions. Studios knew they could count on him not to make waves, not to take controversial stands, not to risk profit by standing up for anything meaningful. He died in 1961, mourned as an icon of American masculinity. His funeral was attended by Hollywood royalty. President Kennedy sent condolences. The comfortable myth of Gary Cooper as a principled hero remained intact because he'd been careful never to let anyone see what he actually believed or didn't believe strongly enough to defend. James Stewart played the everyman, the decent, honest American who did the right thing even when it was hard. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. It's a Wonderful Life. Characters who represented the best of American values.
Well, I can't work around here. Oh, you're following me. Oh, I didn't know that. Oh.
But the man playing them never had to prove he actually held those values. Stewart's personal views on race were never documented because he was smart enough to keep them private. The studio system protected him. His carefully crafted image protected him. The benefit of the doubt protected him. Without smoking gun quotes or proven incidents, he could remain America's sweetheart. But silence in Hollywood during the Golden Age wasn't neutral. The system was openly racist. The industry excluded black actors from meaningful roles. Studios enforced segregation at premieres. The entire structure was built on white supremacy, and James Stewart worked within that structure for decades without ever publicly challenging it. He made films that portrayed idyllic white America as the real America. Small towns full of white faces, stories about white families and white problems and white solutions. His movies helped create and reinforce the idea that the American experience was inherently white. The roles Stewart chose and the films he made weren't accidents. He had power in Hollywood. He could have pushed for different stories or more inclusive casting. He could have used his platform to challenge the industry's racism. He didn't. He made the safe choices that kept him beloved and wealthy. Stewart died in 1997, his reputation unblemished. He was remembered as one of the greatest actors in American cinema. His films are still celebrated as classics. The questions about what he actually believed and what he was willing to tolerate were never asked loudly enough to require answers. W.C. Fields made a career out of playing misanthropes, grumpy old men who hated everyone and everything.
Stand clear and keep your eye on the ball.
Oh, wait, you can't do that.
But that comedic persona created perfect cover for actual prejudices that never had to be examined or defended. His characters were cruel to children, animals, and anyone else who annoyed them. Audiences laughed because it was obviously exaggerated, obviously a performance, but the line between performance and reality was thinner than people wanted to admit. Fields worked in an industry that treated non-white performers as less than human. He performed in that system for decades. He benefited from its exclusions and its hierarchies. And there's no record of him ever objecting or pushing back or using his considerable influence to change anything. The lack of documentation about his racial views wasn't proof of progressive beliefs. It was proof of careful image management. Studios protected their investments by keeping certain information quiet. Fields protected himself by never saying the quiet parts where they could be recorded. His comedy often punched down. That was the formula. Mock people weaker than yourself and present it as satire. The targets changed, but the cruelty remained constant. It was humor built on the idea that some people deserve to be laughed at rather than laughed with. Fields died in 1946, remembered as a comedic genius. His films are still shown. His timing and delivery are still studied. The meanness that ran through his work is treated as an act, even though nobody knows for sure where the act ended and the real man began. Spencer Tracy played moral men, characters who wrestled with right and wrong. Inherit the Wind, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? Films that addressed social issues and presented Tracy as the voice of reason and conscience. But the real Spencer, Tracy never had to prove he possessed those qualities. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner came out in 1967, during the height of the civil rights movement. Tracy played a liberal father learning to accept his daughter's black fiancé. The film presented this acceptance as progressive and difficult, as if treating black people as equals required tremendous moral courage from white people. Tracy's participation in that film secured his legacy as a socially conscious actor, but making one movie about racial tolerance at the end of a 40-year career didn't erase 4 decades of working in a segregated, racist industry without challenging it. His previous films had been set in worlds where non-white people barely existed. When they did appear, they were servants or background characters. Tracy's star vehicles were built on the assumption that white stories were the only stories worth telling. The studio system created and protected Tracy's image as a serious, thoughtful actor who chose meaningful projects. But meaningful in Hollywood terms meant films that white audiences would find profound. Questions about race were avoided for decades, then addressed only when it became profitable to do so. Tracy died just days after finishing Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. The timing gave the film additional weight. His final performance became part of his legend. But one film about accepting interracial marriage didn't transform a career built within and benefiting from systemic racism. Mickey Rooney played Mr. Yunioshi in Breakfast at Tiffany's. He didn't just play an Asian character. He created a grotesque caricature that reduced an entire people to buck teeth, squinted eyes, and broken English. The performance wasn't subtle or ambiguous. It was openly mocking. Rooney wore prosthetics to alter his features. He adopted an exaggerated accent. He played every moment for racist laughs. And director Blake Edwards watched and approved and kept every frame in the final cut. Breakfast at Tiffany's came out in 1961. The Civil Rights Act was still 3 years away, but the civil rights movement was in full force. People were marching and sitting in and getting beaten for demanding equality. And Hollywood was releasing films that treated non-white people as punchlines. Rooney defended the performance for years. He claimed he was just doing his job, following the director's vision, playing the character as written, as if actors have no agency, as if choices aren't choices when they're career choices. The film became a classic despite the racism. People loved Audrey Hepburn's performance. They loved the romance and the fashion and the theme song. The Asian caricature was treated as an unfortunate element that could be overlooked or excused because the rest of the film was so good. Rooney eventually apologized decades later, long after the damage was done, long after generations had watched the film and absorbed the message that Asian people were acceptable targets for mockery. The apology came when it cost him nothing and changed nothing. Fred Astaire was grace personified, the greatest dancer in film history, but in 1936, he put on blackface and performed Bojangles of Harlem. He took a tribute to Bill Bojangles Robinson and turned it into a minstrel show. The number was elaborately produced. Giant shadows of Astaire danced on the wall behind him. The choreography was complex and technically impressive. All that talent and artistry and studio money went into creating a racist spectacle. Astaire wasn't some hack performer padding his resume with controversial material. He was a legitimate genius. He could have honored Robinson in countless ways that didn't involve blackface. He chose this one. The studio chose to film it. Audiences chose to applaud it. Bojangles himself was still alive and working when the number came out. He was relegated to supporting roles and stereotypical parts, while white performers put on makeup and imitated him for bigger paychecks and wider audiences. The tribute wasn't honoring Robinson, it was replacing him. Swing Time, the film containing the number, is still considered one of Astaire's best works. Critics praise the dancing and the romance. The blackface sequence is mentioned as a regrettable product of its time, as if Astaire had no choice but to include it. Astaire died in 1987, his legacy as a dance legend secure. Retrospectives focused on his innovation and artistry. The racism was a footnote. The fact that he used his extraordinary gifts to perpetuate harmful stereotypes didn't diminish his place in film history. Vivien Leigh won an Oscar for playing Scarlett O'Hara. She brought the character to life with passion and complexity. She made audiences care about a woman who owned human beings as property. Leigh spent months portraying a Southern belle who viewed slavery as natural and right. She delivered lines defending the Confederacy. She acted in scenes that romanticized plantation life. And she did it all beautifully, making the ugliness look appealing. Her personal views on race were never documented, but she spent a significant portion of her career embodying racism on screen. She made it glamorous. She made it sympathetic. She helped teach millions of people that slave owners were the real victims of the Civil War. Gone with the Wind defined Leigh's career. No matter what else she did, she would always be Scarlett O'Hara, and Scarlett O'Hara would always be a woman who wanted slavery restored. The character and the actress became inseparable in public memory. Leigh never publicly regretted the role. She never spoke about the film's racism or its historical distortions. Like most of her contemporaries, she treated those elements as irrelevant to her performance. The craft was all that mattered. She died in 1967, still best known for Gone with the Wind. Obituaries focused on her beauty and talent. The fact that her most famous role was in service of Confederate propaganda went unmentioned. Hollywood had decided long ago that the artistry excused the message. Leslie Howard played Ashley Wilkes with dignity and refinement. He made the character sympathetic, a gentleman caught in historical forces beyond his control. He helped sell the film's central lie that the antebellum South was noble and tragic rather than monstrous. Ashley was written as the ideal Southern man, educated, cultured, kind to his slaves. The character embodied the myth of the benevolent slaveholder, the fiction that some masters were different, that slavery could be humane if the right people were in charge. Howard brought gravitas to the role. His British accent added an air of sophistication. He made Ashley seem like a victim of circumstances rather than a beneficiary and perpetrator of atrocity. Audiences pitied him for losing his world instead of celebrating the death of that world. His participation in Gone with the Wind secured his place in film history. But unlike Leigh, Howard didn't live long enough to face questions about the film's legacy. He died in 1943 when his plane was shot down during World War II. The timing of his death froze him in that moment. He became a war hero, his death adding nobility to his memory. The questions about Ashley Wilkes and what the character represented were overshadowed by his sacrifice. Hollywood memorialized Howard as both artist and patriot. The complexity of participating in Confederate propaganda, while later dying in the fight against fascism, was never examined. The contradictions were ignored in favor of a cleaner, simpler story. Anyway, that's it for the video, folks. Bye.